Welcome to the Higher Ed Athletics Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Wren Baker, Vice President and Director of Athletics at University of North Texas. Wren, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's always good this time of year to have a little time to do a podcast.
I always do a lot of research on the schools that I interview the athletic directors from, but I was not aware of how big UNT is. Seems like one of those schools that has Power 5 characteristics when you're on campus and you look at it. And for those that aren't familiar with UNT, I'd just like if you could start with, just profile both the institution, maybe size, location, type, and then the basics of the athletic department as far as conference sports and number of athletes.
Yeah, UNT is a great institution. It's a very diverse institution. It sits just between Dallas and Fort Worth, so it's in the DFW Metroplex. Has been a large institution for a long time, but just crossed the threshold of over 40,000 students this last year for the first time. So I grew up about 3 hours from here, and I'll admit that I didn't know a whole lot about the institution. So that's one of the things coming in that we wanted to make sure that we did, at least within the athletics world, is really extend our brand and our reach and help people become familiar with the institution. It's an institution that focuses both on academic excellence and access. And so we're a Carnegie Research One institution, but we also don't have admission standards so high that people can't get in. And so it's a neat place in that way. And then it's a very diverse institution in terms of majors, like a lot of large institutions. But we actually have a very strong business school, a very strong college of education, engineering, many other schools. But one of the things we're best known for is our College of Music. We have one of the highest ranked College of Music. We'll usually have students that are nominated for Grammy Awards every year. Nora Jones attended here, Don Henley, the Eli Young Band, Pat Boone, Meatloaf. I mean, you just go through, it's a very eclectic group.
Hold up, Eli Young Band? Man, I'm a country music fan. I had no idea.
Yeah, if you follow Eli Young Band on Twitter, they actually tweet about the Mean Green a lot. They're huge sports fans, so they're always out there spreading the message.
I had Charlie Cobb on last season on the podcast, and so he had at his previous institution, Appalachian State, was able to take credit for Eric Church and Luke Combs. And so now you're joining the country stardom by having Eli Young Band.
No question.
In the athletic department, so obviously Conference USA, but what kind of sports and amount of student athletes do you all have?
Yeah, we've got a little over 300 student athletes. We sponsor the 16 sport required sponsorship. Much to our fans' dismay, sometimes they'd like to see us have a few more sports, but that's where we're at. So we have had a lot of success in Conference USA. Moved into that league a few years ago from the Sun Belt. North Texas was FBS for a long time, and then they went through a period where they dropped down to FCS and then come back in the FBS. I believe it was in the 90s, and so since then there's been a renaissance and revival of athletics here in terms of facility support, pride, awareness, and ultimately some success, not both academically and athletically. So it's an institution with a proud history. Mean Joe Green is probably our most prominent alum, but in terms of sports, but lots of great athletes, lots of great moments, but has a sustained history of some institutions. And so that's one of the big focuses that we've had since I've been here is how can we make sure that, our good years are still good to great, but our years that maybe aren't our best years are still very, very competitive. And so we've really tried to focus on that. And I think we've seen a lot of improvement there.
Yeah, I want to kind of focus on that. It makes me think that maybe that leads to my next question. I wanted to talk about the Light the Tower master plan and it made it a 20-year commitment. So is that to basically build an athletic village? I like it's probably the best visual master plan I've seen someone utilizing college athletics. For those that want to check it out, I think it's just likethetower.com. You guys also use a lot of unique websites to get your point across instead of just having to go to the athletic site. But for those that want to look it up, you basically can watch this video where it's just showing the real spot, and then it's popping up through the ground, kind of sprouting at these athletic facilities. And I'm kind of curious. That makes me think, like, it was the 20-year project. Obviously, it takes a lot to raise that money and be able to do that amount of projects. But is that another reason, is trying to really make sure that you're keeping people focused on the future too?
It is. I felt like it was important when I transitioned here. We did both a strategic plan for the entire department, and then we did the facility master plan. And in both of those, I felt it was important that every sport, every student athlete, every coach understand that we have a vision for excellence long term for their program. And so the only way to do that is to go big in terms of the plan. And so we did that, and it was, it seemed very ambitious at the time. I think we put that out 3 or 4 years ago, and it was ambitious. But since then, we opened a new track and field soccer complex, $16 million facility. We opened the new indoor football practice facility. We're actually about to open a new facility that wasn't even on that master plan. We've got to update it, but a new golf practice facility that's here on campus. We had a good arrangement that we at the time didn't feel like would need to be replaced with an outside course. But just travel times, traffic, when we had a little more time to assess that situation, we decided that we wanted to build an on-campus golf practice facility. So we're making a lot of progress on those initiatives. But I just felt like, it was important that I could look at every coach in our end of the year meeting and say, we have a plan to make this one of the best programs in Conference USA in the group of 5, which will ultimately make us competitive nationally. And so we had to build out a plan to do that.
Well, yeah, when you think about 20 years from now, with everything going on in college athletics and playoff expansion, I mean, I was saying earlier, the characteristics of a Power 5, in 20 years, who knows what that looks like, but you all are going to be ready for whatever is the requirement to kind of meet that standard of getting the best coaches and the best student athletes. So I thought it was awesome. I don't get to Texas that often, but I'm sure sometime in the next 20 years I can get there and check out and see how many facilities you have. But I just think it's an awesome campus from doing a little bit of research. And so the strategy also it's so simple that you have like thetower.com. There's a couple others, but just using the domains to make it easier for your donors or people to find it. I thought that was creative too, even the smallest details like that.
Yeah, I speak a lot to different venues and stuff, and it really was born a little bit just out of, especially as we would do those things. So another one is our strategic plan. We creatively named that meangreenstrategicplan.com. So, but it was just an opportunity for me to reference those and it be something that was really easy for people to go find later on and see, rather than buried in a website. And most of that stuff usually gets caught under the athletics tab. And for common fans who don't go to athletic websites every day, those would be hard to find. And yet you don't want to flood your main page with a whole bunch of buttons and stuff that makes it look, clunky and not streamlined as well. So that was kind of where that idea was born, and we went and grabbed a bunch of URLs when I first got here, and we still have some that we're holding on to, but I just feel like it's easier when you can point somebody straight to that website and not have to go with the backslash and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, I'm in the domain game, as I call it. So it is. I mean, it's so cheap to get them until someone else gets it, and then you got to buy them out. But I was surprised when I was coming up with the name of the podcast 3 years ago that higheredathletics.com was available. I'm never giving that thing up. It's on auto renew. It's just so easy to do. I want to get kind of to I like to keep the focus on your current institution, of course, but I do want to go back a little bit to your throughout your career, because you initially started at age 26 as a principal and athletic director at a high school. Was that your original plan coming out of college? That I know you were also a basketball coach. Was it so that you could be a basketball coach and a high school AD? Can you maybe just share that story of how you got to that point?
Yeah. Well, when I went to college originally, I was a computer science major. I graduated high school in 96. And so in the late 90s, there was a lot of concern that computer systems would crash when we turned over to the year 2000. And ultimately, none of them did, but there was a lot of concern with that. So being able to be a computer programmer at the time was going to be your ticket. I was a first generation college student. Both my parents had jobs where they worked very hard, but neither made a lot of money. And so I was focused on, hey, let's get a job here where we can make a good living. And so once I got in, I actually took a class for fun, theories of coaching basketball. I kind of missed sports being in college a little bit. I mean, I went to games and stuff, but wasn't inside it. And in Division II, I went to school Southeastern Oklahoma State for my undergrad. Me, Dennis Rodman, and Reba McIntyre. So that's a pretty eclectic group of graduates there. But
notable alumni on the wiki page, I'm sure.
Yeah, I probably did not make that notable alumni, but those two certainly did. But I took that class, and because it was Division II and smaller, the head basketball coach actually taught it, and he ended up inviting me to be a student assistant coach, and so I did, and kind of fell in love with education and coaching again. Rediscovered that passion, I should say. So my parents weren't thrilled when I changed my major. But I did, and that was the plan: coach and teach in the public schools, and eventually one day move into administration. And things just happened where I ended up getting a GA position at Oklahoma State for Eddie Sutton, getting my master's there, and that opened a lot of doors. And and then finished that, and actually had a chance to go back home as a principal. And I told the superintendent, who had taught me when I was in school 3 times. I told her no, but she was very persistent. And eventually I ended up taking that job and went back for a year and was a middle school principal and then AD of the entire district, which was about 1,100 students in rural Oklahoma. And so that was an unbelievable experience, really taught me a lot administratively. I mean, when you have to do evaluations of classroom teachers, of teachers who taught you, with you being 26 and them knowing that you actually haven't spent much time teaching in the classroom, that was a great growth experience for me, and an opportunity to learn, and ultimately I think it probably helped me be a better administrator once I plugged back into college sports.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because didn't realize it's the whole district. I mean, and you're talking about those teachers. I mean, that gives you, as a younger administrator, when you get to college, which we'll talk about in a second, is you could have really old school coaches and same as teachers that, what does this young kid know? Like, you just got out of college. But I bet that, I'm guessing that gave you a lot of confidence moving forward, and maybe you adjusted the way you evaluated or just approached the job just based on your high school AD and principal experience.
It did. And what's interesting is as I continued to progress throughout my career, I had some opportunities come when I was younger. I mean, I met Valliant Public Schools as a principal, and I get a chance to go to Rogers State University, which was a small university in Oklahoma, and be the very first AD and head basketball coach in school history. Basically, started sports there, and the president there, I still don't know exactly why he hired me. I couldn't have been the most qualified for the job, but sometimes you get those opportunities in life, and you got to make the most of them. And but I remember a few years later, I interviewed for I think I was at Raleigh State about 4.5 years. I interviewed at Northwest Missouri for the job, and it kept coming up my age. Some people were more careful to craft that as to not be discriminatory in age, but some weren't, and it kept coming up. And I remember kind of thinking I had to answer that at Valliant, I had to answer that at Rogers State, and so I'm thinking, well, I've been doing this for 5.5, 6 years now. I feel like I'm getting some experience. When does these questions about age go away? And so now I don't get those questions, and I wish people still ask me about being young for the job. But I think those were great experiences because when you have to go into a room of people who have more experience than you and sell them on a vision, it forces you to have to incorporate them and develop it. It's the only way they're going to buy in. And so I was able to learn those experiences and learn them in a way that it really fell into place. I started Valiant, had to go through that, but then I got to go to Rogers State, and I hired everybody. So as people come in, they were bought into what we were doing and how we wanted to do it. We were having success. And so a lot of people assume starting an athletic program was difficult. And in some ways it was, but in terms of moving forward with a shared vision and strategy, it was the easiest place I've been because everybody came in on the same page. So then fast forward, I go to Northwest Missouri State, which is one of the most successful Division II programs in the country. And I just kind of start rough charging early with what I think we need to do to get better. And you can just sense that not everybody's necessarily buying everything you're selling. And so I had to learn to go back and bring everybody into creating a vision. And so I wasn't selling my vision, it was implementing our vision. And so each of those steps really helped me with that and really helped prepare me, I think, for where my career would continue to take me.
Yeah, I noticed that you started the program at Rogers State, who's now a member of NCAA Division II. And what did you want to do? Why did you want to take on that role of building something new? Is it because you're so young and ambitious? You think that you see like, wow, this is a blank canvas of what it could be?
I didn't know what I didn't know. So I thought I had all the answers, and so, but it actually ended up being a great opportunity. I had a tremendous president, Joe Wiley, who would end up retiring from Rogers State and go on to Freed Hardeman, which is a Church of Christ school in Tennessee, and was the president there for a few years. But he was a tremendous leader and just breathed confidence in me, but also would teach me when I was kind of going astray and maybe wasn't approaching things the right way. And so, looking back, most people, while we were at Rogers State and certainly since, would say, man, that went perfect. And because I think I left there, we'd won about 70% of our games and we were competing at a high level. We made a lot of mistakes when I was there, but nobody really knew it because they didn't know what to expect. There was no tradition. It was a relatively new school. It had been a community college that Oklahoma had made to a regional university. And so we didn't have a lot of alums. And so it really was a great opportunity to be aggressive, to think big, to plan, to lead boldly and plan for big initiatives. But you could also make mistakes. And I do think we made some mistakes looking back, but they were aggressive mistakes. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be there. And I really feel like being able, as I talked to a lot of colleagues in the industry, everybody's path is different. So some people have only worked in one area, or they've only worked at Power 5 institutions, or they've only done this or that. The opportunity to coach and be an AD at a startup collegiate program, I think it gave me a great sense of how the pieces fit together, and when something's broke, how to fix it. And I think that's helped me be successful later on. And so I'm very grateful when I look back for that opportunity.
Yeah, I think one thing I am appreciative of in my experiences. I've worked at what we would call mid major. I've worked at a small D2 private institution, and now I work in the Power Five. But also went to school at an urban research university in a city. So it gives you this perspective that of college athletics. Is everyone thinks of college athletics, if you're an outsider, like everything's the same. Like there's so much differences, but there's some things that are similar. But like just your institutions are different. Your the expectations, your resources are different. And one thing that I think that's why I'm so curious and why I started the podcast is really to have an excuse to try and do more research and talk to people like yourself and learn about these different paths. But for those that maybe have been at one or two places and haven't been as many areas as you, can you just talk about what you think are similarities or differences between all these different levels of higher education and high school athletic directors? Between you were at D1 FBS, D2, NAIA in high school. So what's some of the similarities? What's some of the differences? Because I think some people might be scared to go to a different level if they see a job because they think, oh, I'll never get back.
Yeah. I talked and counsel some of our staff who look at opportunities, and a lot of them are worried about that. And I do think if your ultimate goal is to be a senior level administrator in the Power Five, at some point you're going to have to probably get some Power Five experience. But I don't think it matters as much what order that experience comes in. And so, like when our staff comes to me and they have an opportunity to get a higher level position at a mid major or a D2 institution, I always encourage them to really think about it and evaluate it, because when you have been high school, NAIA, D3, D2, you know a little bit about compliance because you have 8 to 10 people full time in the athletic department other than coaches. And so everybody's involved in compliance. You have one person who does compliance, so they can't do it all. So, when I was at Roger State and there was a compliance question, like we all huddled up in the room and got a rule book out and, and tried to give interpretations. Game management. Everybody had to help set up the gym. We had to put out bench chairs, and when that was over, everybody stayed till everybody left so we could put them up and turn the lights out. And so I think with that comes a really great understanding as you scale things up in how it fits together. And so I'm not an accountant by trade, but I have I think a really good understanding of budgets and how they fit together. Going back to, because when I was at Roger State, we built every budget. People talk about zero-based budgeting, but we really started from not even having a budget. We had to justify the budget we did. And so we basically everybody who would give us their budget, we took it, we looked at how they spent their money and put one together and then evaluate it. But that experience really helps now, even though the numbers are a lot bigger. I think at the time my budget might have been, $2 or $3 million. At North Texas, we're like 40 million. So the numbers are bigger, the scale is bigger. But the understanding of how it all fits together is the same. So I would encourage people to not just be dismissive of those opportunities at smaller institutions, because at the end of the day, when you get that job, that's your goal, your destination, your dream job, if it's a Power Five senior level position, the worst that can happen is to get it and not be prepared for it. And so I always try to tell people, focus on getting to places that prepare you for that opportunity. And I think, those lower levels, they do that more because I think you get a more diverse experience just based upon, that there's not enough people to be siloed.
Yeah, I would say that if I focus more on location, I've talked to ADs and I talked to other people, I ask them about their location priorities too, because it's not by mistake that out of my 32 years, I spent 31 of them in Indiana. I took a leap of faith for 1 year to South Florida, and who wouldn't in South Florida as a GA? But I've been fortunate to work in the state, but I think some people instead of just worrying about what level it is, they also should just, come up with your priorities of location. I mean, you said you grew up a few hours from there. I mean, how important was it for you to stay in that area? Because I'm sure you had other opportunities to go to different parts of the country, but you spent, you're back in the South.
Yeah, we Heather and I both grew up in rural Oklahoma, and before Northwest Missouri State, we had never lived outside the state, and she was pregnant with our first child when we moved to Northwest, and that was a big step for us. I think it was maybe 10, 12 hours from home, but we grew as a family, grew as a couple during that time, and so there's places I've never felt like I have to be home, so to speak, but there's places that I don't know that I would be a fit. I remember a search firm called me a few years ago, and it was for a position in Long Island. And, I remember telling the firm, like, I own 3 pair of cowboy boots. I'm not sure that I belong on Long Island. And so, I think it's important to just assess that fit to make sure that you and your family can be happy and be successful there. Now, I also think sometimes getting outside of your comfort zone is the best way to grow. And, that first year in Missouri, when we were in Maryville, was one of the more stressful years of our married life, but it really forged our relationship. We were still a young married couple. We've been married 4 or 5 years, but that was really the first time where we were on our own and just had to get through difficulties together. And so, I think that's important. Once you have children, obviously that all comes into play. And so, we went from Maryville, Missouri, when we were at Northwest, to Memphis, and it was about the same distance from home, maybe a little bit closer. Then we went back to Columbia, Missouri, to Mizzou, and then we came here. So we've always been a day trip from home. And I think that's important, but sometimes that was a 10, 12 hour range, and now it's just an hour and a half, 2 hours. But, I think for me, it really, any assessment of any potential opportunities always starts with my 2 girls and my wife. And do I think it's a place they can be happy? So I think people have to. Bubba Cunningham told me one time that every decision he's made that was based on his family has worked out, and every decision he made that was based on what was best for his career has ended up being difficult. And I've thought about that a lot, and I definitely have found that to be true.
Well, and I can vouch. He was on the podcast too, and he spent time in Indiana and North Carolina, two awesome states, and so that's great advice. And I want to kind of shift gears towards talking about your success. You mentioned you're at Northwestern Missouri State. You hired a head coach in football that won 3 straight D2 national championships, and you've all had a lot of success recently at North Texas. So, kind of curious, what's your philosophy behind not only your hiring strategy, but also evaluating and supporting your coaches?
Well, in terms of hiring, I think every hire is different. But I love people, back to what we've talked about here. I love people who've done it at places with less resources and had success, and then continued to move up, move around, and have success. So you look at Grant McCaslin, our men's basketball coach, who's done an amazing job here. And he was very successful in Division II. He was very successful in junior college. And that was one of the things that really attracted me to his profile. We hired Rodney DeLong, our head softball coach, and it was very similar. He had coached in Division II and had a lot of success at an institution without resources. And so I just think that those are very helpful. With Coach Dorrell, that was an interesting one because Northwest has great tradition. Mel Churchma, who's kind of D2's Bear Bryant. If you look up Mel Churchma's record, he's probably the most successful coach that a lot of people don't know much about. But I think over a 10-year period, he averaged 12-2 in a spot in the semifinals in Division II. And so I take the job, and a week or two later, he calls me and lets me know he's going to retire. And I still joke with him that, I embarrassed myself how much I begged him to just give me one more year before he retired. But we ultimately, he had a long-time defensive coordinator, been there for a long time, was kind of seen as the heir apparent, and we elevated him. Scott Boswick, great man, would have been a great coach. Tragic accident that summer. He had a heart attack, and at 50 years old, he passed away before he ever coached a game. So he was head coach for a few months, but didn't get a chance to coach a game. So we were really then in flux and trying to decide: do we go interim? Do we do what's the best path? And decided we were going to start and visit with Coach Dorrell, who was our offensive coordinator. And going into that meeting, I would have probably said that the odds are we would hire from outside. But Adam just blew me away with how prepared he was and how much he knew about the Northwest program. And when I talk to coaches, I talk about this, but there was one moment that was seemingly insignificant, but it wasn't insignificant to me. And that was, he had a calendar 90-day plan like a lot of people have. But he had on there what day he was going to call and order chin straps. And I asked him about it. He goes, "Hey," he said, I've played here. I've been assistant coach here. I've been a coordinator here. And we've never made it to the end of the season with enough chin straps. So I'm going to call and place that order because I want to make sure that we do. And it just stuck out to me, not because how many chin straps we have is that important, but I knew that he had thoroughly assessed where we had fallen short in a program that was very successful. And so, I think the thing that I always look for in head coaches is, do they understand our program? So you take North Texas, for instance. We're in Dallas, Fort Worth. So most people, and rightfully so, would assume our location is one of the best attributes we have because we're in a very talent-rich area. But if that was all it took to be successful, our history would be better than it is. And, I think being in this area, in some ways, is more complicated because everybody in the country recruits Dallas, Fort Worth. And there's more prospects than you could ever get out to see or ever manage. And so you could waste a lot of time on prospects that ultimately aren't going to pick your institution. So for here, I think it's important that people can articulate to me how they're going to strategically recruit the talent in this area. Because just saying, there's a lot of great players within our campus and we're going to get our fair share, that's not a plan that I feel confident enough to go along with. And so every situation's different. I do prefer head coaching experience. But I've also, Adam Dorrell didn't have head coaching experience, and I've hired, people that haven't. But I think having been an assistant coach and then moving into a head coach role and then having been an assistant AD, deputy AD, and moving into an AD role, I have seen how different the responsibilities are with those jobs, and that nothing really prepares you until you've set in the job. And so I like head coaching experience, but at the end of the day, that's not more important than understanding our institution and our recruiting footprint.
That's great. And kind of keeping it tactical again, is you seem to be known for your ability to increase fundraising significantly. And obviously you have a team around you to help with that. But what do you think makes you a good fundraiser? And what would your advice be for those that are either intimidated or hesitant to ask people for money to help them become more comfortable with the aspect of the job?
Yeah, fundraising is one of those things. Everybody's philosophy is a little different. Chris Del Conte is one of the best fundraisers in the country, and I've heard him speak a lot. he talks about he tries to ask for money on the first meeting, and he never gets past the second meeting without asking for money. And I do think there's something to be said for just making the ask, and getting to that point. But for me, my style is always to take time to learn about the individual, and then to communicate the needs that we have that I think might match up with them, and then let them decide. And so, even though when you follow the places I've been, every place has set records in fundraising, and I'm really proud of that because I know that's provided a lot of opportunities and improved the experience for a lot of student athletes. I've never really looked at myself as a fundraiser. I've looked at myself as more of a matchmaker, and just trying to learn what it is about someone's institution that they're passionate about, that they love, that inspires them, and then matching that up with the needs that we have and the initiatives and the projects that we have. And so that's the way I've approached it in my philosophy. But I think just like with coaching, everybody kind of has to figure out their own personality and how they approach these things. And I, the only way to do that is to trial and error and to force yourself to get out there and meet people and ultimately find out what works for you. But everybody can be a successful fundraiser. I really believe that. It's just finding that style and that philosophy that allows you to excel at it.
I haven't had to fundraise in my areas, and I do help another like a research organization help with some of this stuff. But a comparison that makes sense to me is I speak to a lot of college athletes that are coming in as freshmen, and I experience it myself that people are like deathly afraid of speaking in public. But if you know the material and you just start practicing it, you can get really good at it. So I imagine if you just realize that everyone's probably going to be worried about this, asking for money, but you just practice authentic relationships and you study the individual. Like you talked about matchmaking. Now I speak all the time and I host a podcast. I used to be deathly afraid of speaking in public, and I run meetings, and I never would have thought that. So I kind of imagine, you think that's a good comparison to what people that are a little intimidated from making the ask, that they just need to do a little more research and practice?
Absolutely. It's absolutely the same. And I think practicing with a friend, a spouse, a coworker, a colleague, that you'll get more comfortable with going through it. And, for me, the big thing that really helps me start is just to learn about the donor. People love to tell their story, and they love to tell you about the business they built or the career that they built, their family, their grandkids, their travels. And if you just start from that point as a conversation where you genuinely are seeking to know all that you can about that person, and learn from them, their experiences, learn about them. For me, that has always easily transitioned into, let me tell you about, what we're doing and how we're trying to move our program forward and the needs that we have. And it's more more than just going in and saying, "Hey, can I sell you this?" It's that I heard you talk about X, Y, and Z. We're doing something very similar, and here's opportunities where you can be a part of that. And more often than not, people do want to be a part of it.
The practicing with a friend or a spouse is a good one too, because we're almost completely debt free. The last 2 years we've been paying off debt significantly, so I feel like I have to negotiate for everything that I want to break the budget. So maybe if I practice fundraising on that, I'll build up more confidence.
Good luck with that. That may actually hurt your confidence.
Yeah, that's true. Another thing you said about alumni and fundraisers or donors like to tell their story. I had thought about this like a year ago. I'm surprised more schools and athletic departments don't have like an alumni podcast that people just share their story. I feel like it would just make them so much more involved. So if anyone listening does that, I'll be a sponsor on the podcast for coming up with that idea. Well, the last question I want to ask you is kind of tying it back to my doctoral program. I did a paper and got to choose the topic. It had to be a revenue generating paper. And this is for higher education. It has nothing to do with athletics, but I looked at it through that lens. But I'm a believer that it's only a matter of time before institutions allow corporate logo patches on athletic uniforms. It's happening in professional sports. The market is obviously there. I think it'd be really helpful for women's sports too. And this is something that for my paper, I had to, write it out. I'm just kind of curious if what you think about that opportunity. Do you think there's a market there in the future for, we see stadium naming rights and arenas, as long as the student athletes are heavily involved in the decision process of what they're going to wear on their uniform. Do you think that's something that could happen? And do you think there's a market? And what are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think there would be a market for it. I mean, there's a market for any kind of association and advertising with college sports. For the most part, we have remained entrenched in history and tradition in college sports. And obviously, over the course of the last few months and years, a lot of those traditions have been challenged. So, that we now have student athlete name, image, and likeness income. And for a long time, people wanted no part of that, not because they wanted to keep student athletes from bettering themselves, but because they believed it would erode the integrity of the traditions of college sports. And so I do think eventually it'll happen. People will be very careful because a spot on the logo is such a prominent a spot on the uniform is such a prominent location. And so you're opening yourself up as opposed to a sign at your venue or something to being associated with not just that company, but the leadership of that company and the board of that company. And in this day and generation, when there are no secrets, when someone says something or does something that maybe isn't above board, it's quickly out there. And so I think people will be very careful about that association that they would put on their uniform. But I do think we'll see that at some point. And as long as we can continue to invest in our student athletes, continue to provide more undergrad and postgraduate opportunities, more academic support, more academic tools and resources, I think we should try to grow revenue as long as it allows us to provide those opportunities.
Wren Baker, Vice President and Director of Athletics, University of North Texas, Mean Green. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, I enjoyed it, Travis, and I've went back and watched several of your podcasts. You're doing great work, and I appreciate you providing a forum for people to get to learn from others.
Thank you.